Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is November 2nd, 2017, and this is episode 59. Politicos is a podcast that explores what's happening in British Columbia and across the country. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter where we're at PoliticosPod, and support the show at patreon.com/Politicos.
I'm Scott.
And I'm Ian. Lots up tonight. First, the BC Utilities Commission has delivered a damning report about a dam. And then we have two interviews. First, we talk to Keith Moore from 123 Vancouver about the importance of reforming Vancouver's electoral system. And then we sat down with Hector Bremner, the newly elected Vancouver City Councillor. We had to cut both of these interviews for length, so you can find the full unedited versions at our Patreon at patreon.com/Politicos. But first, a huge congratulations to our premier sponsor, Lindsay Tedds, on her appointment as chair of the MSP Task Force Committee just this afternoon. Big thanks to her for helping make this show possible, and I guess to, in the near future, getting rid of MSPs for us all. Our first segment, Plan B for Site C. On Wednesday afternoon, the BC Utilities Commission released its final report, which the NDP government asked them to put together on the Site C dam, not giving any recommendations, but taking a look at the economics of the project. Does it still make sense? Is this a good idea? And how is it going? And the answer is bad, it sounds like. The top line result is that if the government wanted to stick with the dam and finish it in a conclusion, it's very, very unlikely that it'll hit its 2024 target date of completion. It's already over budget, so it'll cost at least $10 billion to finish when it was supposed to be about $8.5 billion. So there's all these other unknowns and risks, and they're saying easily 20 to 50% cost overrun. On the other hand, stopping and killing the dam right now and remediating all the land would cost about $1.8 billion on top of what they've already spent. And then we'd have to build something to fulfill the requirements and the amount of energy we're going to need in the near future. They did review BC Hydro's forecasts and concluded that they were overly optimistic in terms of how much energy the province would actually need. And they thought realistically we might even go under their low prediction of how much electricity the province will need in the future, in which case having a giant hydroelectric dam isn't as important as, say, having some wind farms, geothermal, and solar energy technologies, perhaps. They actually ran a quick back-of-the-envelope calculation, it looks like, and they say alternative energy would effectively have the same value as that from Site C. And then there was a third scenario they looked at, which was, let's just put a pause on the project and in 2024 start building it again. And they concluded that that dumb idea is a dumb idea and it would be expensive and risky and there's absolutely no upside and please don't do this. They said explicitly, we're not supposed to give a recommendation, but this one is bad. So the suspension one's probably out. But otherwise, this looks to me, and Andrew Weaver's already making this case, like a pretty clear path for the NDP to kill the project.
Yeah, this definitely gives the NDP political cover if they want to move against the project, and they haven't been quite as strongly opposed to it as the Greens, but there's definitely a fair bit of skepticism among the NDP on this one.
I think the one thing that's maybe held a little bit more hesitant from being as anti-Site C as the Greens is just that, well, what about the jobs kind of argument? We need to have employment in the interior, in the north. They don't want to be the party of no, even though with some of the actions on fish farms that we talked about last week and their position on the Kinder Morgan pipeline, for example, they're going to get that reputation.
And the Liberals are already trying to sow that reputation.
But with the cost overruns and just all of the risks, I don't see a path forward for this dam that's not just a hole for money that is really hard to justify, especially with the environmental base of the NDP.
Yeah, and probably worth pointing out that as a mega project goes, like they almost exclusively go over budget. I believe studies typically show around 15 to 20% is the typical overshoot for most projects.
And so this one with a 20 to 50% estimate overshoot is a particularly bad example.
Well, that was just the mean overshoot. There's quite a bit of variation on how badly they can go. But there's a fair bit of uncertainty kind of around the forecasts, and the report did conclude BC Hydro is probably very optimistic on it, but I do think it's worth really kind of drilling down on it, because there's a whole bunch of stuff that we just don't really know about, and with electric vehicles coming on as a bigger portion of the grid, but at the same time we get more efficient household appliances and everything. They even talked a bit in there about battery technology and whether or not that's going to help or hurt the solar issue. And so there's just a lot of kind of uncertainty there, and it's one of the things that makes such a big, single investment kind of a little risky.
Well, and there's also uncertainty around what other jurisdictions are doing. Right now, it seems like there actually is quite a bit of energy production capacity in North America. It's not always necessarily connected very well, so you can't get power. Maybe that's Jagmeet Singh's super grid that he'll introduce in 2019.
And that actually brings up an interesting point, and when I unfortunately haven't seen discussed all that much around Site C is right now Canada's going through the process of phasing out coal power, which doesn't really affect BC because I think we have 2 thermal electric generation stations, neither which run on coal in BC. But right next door to us and relatively close to Site C is Alberta, which does have a significant portion of their electricity run by coal. And if there wants to be one of those, lifelines thrown to the project, maybe working out a deal with Alberta to take some of the electricity and, have clean hydro rather than very dirty coal might be a way to go about it. Because overall, humanity in general should be doing a lot more hydropower and a lot less other stuff, but BC, which already has a lot of hydropower, and in fact that's basically exclusively what we do, maybe isn't the place that needs much more of it.
Well, and of course on the go ahead with it side are more risks and challenges, like the giant tension cracks that have appeared in the middle of it that they're not totally sure what has caused exactly yet or how to fix. And that can be incredibly alarming for a giant structure that's not supposed to crack.
Yeah, the cracks, I believe, are not in the structure itself, but in the banks, which also have problems and when the sides of dam reservoirs start to fail, it's very concerning. It's the last thing we want is to have another Hayant Dam here, which not quite the same geology, but that was bad, and it would be a good thing to avoid.
So fixing those will cost money, and in theory is possible, assuming you throw enough money at it. But those can add up, and it leaves unknowns, which means the $10 billion we sink into this could easily become even more, at which point you go, well, we could just build a lot more wind turbines and other things to make up for that.
Yeah, and wind turbines do have issues, same with solar around intermittency, but within the context of BC, which is 95% hydroelectric in its source, it's one of those things we probably don't have to worry about for a long time, and one dam's worth of hydroelectricity that's now on intermittent renewables probably isn't going to be a big problem for us.
The other side of this entire equation that the BCUC was not in the position to really review are the environmental and First Nations concerns. Just today, the Supreme Court of Canada dropped the ruling in the Tunaha case, which was an Indigenous group in the East Kootenays that was objecting on religious grounds to a proposed ski hill development. They ultimately lost that, and the court ruled that the government's consultations were sufficient to meet its constitutional obligations. But those rulings didn't invoke UNDRIP at all, the UN Declaration on Rights of Indigenous People, which this new government says is guiding every action it takes, especially around project resource developments with Indigenous peoples. So right now there are a number of bands in northern BC that do not want this dam in that area, and that presents the challenge of how do you get free, prior, and informed consent. So right now the BC government and Michelle Mungle, the minister responsible for this, is talking about how they're going to review all the technical aspects of this report and then also speak to the First Nations around there. And later this month, or maybe in December at the latest, we'll hear what Cabinet has ultimately decided they're going to do. But I feel still like the safe money is on a path to scrapping it.
Yeah, I agree there's better than even odds that this ends up getting scrapped, but it's, I'd say, closer to 50-50 on that one than not. You know, maybe 55-60%. It's one of those things that the NDP is in a difficult position on, because they've already kind of said no to a few big things that were kind of in the works, notably the Massey Bridge and being fighting the Kinder Morgan pipeline, and they will probably be looking to throw a bone to kind of the blue collar construction worker end of the labor side of the party, and also as a jobs for the interior thing. So it does put them in a bit of a difficult position.
For perspective, this dam is right now employing 2,000 people, which is a small town in BC. And once you are employing that many people, you then need people supporting those people, like restaurant owners and everything else that goes in a town. So killing this dam will employ people to clean up the mess for a while. But even if the dam finishes, it won't have a 2,000 person support staff. It'll have maybe 100 or 200. I don't know how many people work at a dam these days.
Probably less.
Yeah, maybe only 5. Who knows? Anyone who works at a dam, give us a call. But building the dam will give more jobs for longer than scrapping it. It's just a matter of how do you balance all of these tensions, and not fun times around the cabinet table, it sounds like.
No.
We're sitting down here with Keith Poor from 123 Vancouver. Keith, why don't you just tell us a bit about yourself and how you got into caring about municipal electoral reform?
Yeah, absolutely. So I ran for city council in Guelph in 2014, and I actually ran on a platform of bringing proportional representation to Guelph. Little did I know there was actually a 123 Guelph already started. And so once the election was over, I didn't win, or else I wouldn't be here. I met up with the gang at 123 Guelph, and things kind of took off from there. I moved here 2 years ago for a job, and also I didn't know 123 Vancouver had already begun here after the 2015 or 2005 referendum. It had started and then kind of fizzled out, and the person who started, Dave Meslin, said, well, here's an opportunity. Why don't you go out and reignite 123 Vancouver?
So for those of us who aren't aware, do you kind of walk us through what the current system in Vancouver is and how that works?
Sure. So we currently have what's called block voting. It's a steroid version of first past the post. You have 10 votes. You can elect 10 seats. It's multi-member, and we get even more highly skewed results. If you think about the 1996 election, NPA got 50.5% of the vote and took all 10 seats, which kind of distorts the reality where, NPA didn't actually get 100% of the seats. They didn't get 100% of the power. They just ended up, because of our flawed system, they got the seats and ruled for the 3 years.
I guess that's a good segue into where should we be going? What is the system you'd like to see?
123 Vancouver prefers STV because we're already multi-member system. I have heard from other people that they want a ward system, and STV works perfectly fine with that constraint. We could also see a move to MMP should we want wards, and then we can elect at large the disproportionate number of seats.
Right. So I'm sure everyone listening to this listened to the electoral reform episode we did nearly a year ago now, but for those one or two who I'm sure who might not have, you just go through what those acronyms are?
Yeah, so STV is single transferable vote. You use a ranked ballot, and because we have multi-member wards, so you are essentially electing multiple people for one area. You end up getting a proportional outcome, because if you don't get your first choice, you'll probably get your second or third choice. So that's STV in a nutshell. MMP is mixed member proportional. You have a set of ridings. You have kind of it's explained as being multi-tiered. You have one tier, which is riding level. You have local representation. And then the second tier is at large, meaning that, well, it's exactly what we have right now. You have multiple winners, and that can be made up of top-up seats. So if a party received 20% of the vote but only got one seat, they would then receive one top-up seat as well.
So Vancouver's kind of unique, I think, in Canada, except for maybe Montreal, in being one of the few cities with branded political parties actively operating, rather than sort of just everyone who's secretly on a slate or has the same backroom strategists working for each of their campaigns, as sometimes happens. And Vancouver's also, as far as I know, the only one operating in Canada at this at-large system. I lived in Edmonton and Calgary, where they both have ward systems. What are other cities doing, and are any cities in Canada using these sort of ranked ballot systems?
Okay, so all municipalities in BC actually are at large. They are elected at large. So if you go to Surrey, if you go to Prince George, they're elected at large. Most other provinces and municipalities outside of BC all have a ward system. So that's one major difference. And we, like you said, we do have a party system here, which we don't see anywhere else in Canada. That being said, London, Ontario has moved to go to a ranked ballot AV, alternative vote system. So that means that they only have one person elected in their ward, but they are using a ranked ballot.
So what will it take to actually kind of get to where you want to go on this and to change the system? And are there any politicians that are currently on side with this?
Yeah, so we're actually really excited. What it takes is a change in the Vancouver Charter and the Local Elections Act, or the Local Government Act. We made draft amendments to both pieces of the legislation, and we submitted it to Adam Olsen, who is the Green MLA on the island, or one of. So he's currently holding on to that. We've also sent it to the Green Party researchers and told them, hey, you guys have committed to this. You said you would push this forward if you got elected in the last election. The NDP said they'd look into it. They were okay with it, but they were also pretty strong on the referendum point for municipal as well. Ideally, we wouldn't want to see a referendum, but especially since council has unanimously voted to have proportional representation, 5 out of 6 votes were unanimous, and then the last vote was not unanimous, but it still passed.
So locally, you're saying the parties are all on board, Vision, NPA, the Greens?
I wouldn't say NPA is totally on board, but they have voted for it in the past, and I believe they think that right now they have a disproportionate number of seats, and so it would be in their best interest to implement it.
So what is 123 Vancouver doing to change our current system? What campaigns do you have going right now?
Right now we have a petition going on our website, 123vancouver.ca. We have a couple thousand signatures, which we're really excited about. And again, we're working with Adam Olsen on having him introduce a private member's bill to amend both the pieces of legislation.
I don't know if you looked at this or if this is just outside your field, but the BC government this week, or the NDP, introduced a bill to reform campaign finances at the municipal level. Is that something in 123's wheelhouse at all?
We discussed this at our strategy meeting, and we wanted to make this a campaign issue as well. And so during the election, we also did send out an email saying, what about these other aspects that the elections task force, which was created last year, were discussing and had proposed. So what was discussed by the elections task force was electoral campaign finance, proportional representation, and allowing permanent residents to vote. And so we've been pushing all those issues in a way to better our democracy.
Have you taken a look at the NDP's proposals for campaign finance reform, and do you have any thoughts on them?
I took a light look at it. I saw that it was, $1,200 limit for personal donations and no...
Corporate union.
Corporate and union. I'm in favor of that. Having run in Guelph, Ontario, we had similar limitations to our donations.
Was there anything we didn't get to that you'd want to pitch in?
So there is another effort called Local Choice BC, which I also participate in, which is not just Vancouver, but trying to get other municipalities on board. And this is an approach we're taking that is different from 123 Vancouver, where we're trying to get politicians to get on board. And so we had the mayor of Whistler, I believe, say that we should be giving municipalities more power to make these kinds of changes.
Any success with that to date, or is it mostly just getting off the ground?
We launched it about a year ago, and we have about 12 mayors and councillors on board. We're trying to look for more, of course. And so hopefully, as time progresses, we'll be able to add names to that list.
It's a fairly straightforward, good idea, I think.
Yeah, well, we're both on board with it, so...
It just makes sense. When you look at the popular vote in the last election, NPA should have had the plurality, not so much a majority, but they would have had the plurality of seats with 4. Vision was overcompensated with seats, and the Greens were shot down 1 seat. And I believe Cope would have also received 1 more seat.
Well, and you can just look at the recent by-election, where Hector Bremner of NPA won with 28% of 11% support.
Absolutely.
And that's not to say he didn't deserve it or didn't try hard, but it's such a divided field that you can't say any of them really captivated the citizenry.
Yeah, the results were pretty dismal, especially when voter turnout was 11%, not even 11%. In this by-election, citizens, Vancouverites, were not intrigued enough to go out and vote. They weren't inspired enough to go out and vote. And that's saying a lot, because there were some quite inspirational leaders that were running.
Well, and the current system very much requires parties to do a lot of strategizing in advance. Like the Greens ran 3 candidates for school board, but they ended up getting the top 3 positions in who got the most votes, which suggests if they'd run more, they could have a Green majority school board potentially. But the system disincentivized that because they have to just guess in advance.
Because there aren't really many polls that get done for school board or for parks board.
I don't know if there's any.
Even at the council level, polling's pretty hit and miss.
Yeah, so I remember I only looked at one poll and it said that Pete Fry was clearly ahead. I was like, that's interesting. The Greens are well ahead and they're doing well. Cool. But really, polls don't actually capture who's voting. They just say, who would you vote for if you were to go and vote?
Do you see a risk that any of these systems or any of these changes could further entrench the power of municipal political parties over independents?
Usually, the ideal system would be STV, because that gives voters more power to elect independents. It gives independents a better chance, because if you're a typical voter, you go into the ballot box and you're just like, who am I going to vote for? Oh, I like this independent, but I got to stick to a party line. That's kind of the normal thinking right now. If you're using a ranked ballot, that you then get to shift your thinking to saying, oh, I really like that independent. I'm going to choose this person as number one. Okay, and then I like this party, so number two. Okay, this other person, I didn't like what he said, but I like the party's ideas, number three. And you can rank your ballot like that. So MMP, the mixed member proportional, kind of gives parties more power, but STV would give independents a better and fairer chance.
So while it gives outside voice and voices that don't tend to do so well in our current system more of a chance, one of the concerns that always gets raised whenever we talk about electoral reform is the fringe voices we don't necessarily want to have a major platform. Typically, the racists and all that stuff.
Will we get the Vancouver Nazi Party elected?
Yeah, that's basically what I'm getting at is, do you have a response to that sort of concern that gets raised?
All you have to do is look down in the South, where the U.S. used a first-past-the-post system. They elected someone that didn't have the popular vote. They elected someone who promotes racist ideas. The white supremacists are coming out in droves now, revealing themselves or just coming out of the shadow. And it's because of a flawed system that doesn't give these people a voice. And if you elect one or two racist people, that gives them enough for them to say, hey, I'm represented, but it doesn't give them enough power to then overthrow a government or take control of, a legislature.
Well, Keith, I think this was pretty interesting. You tell people maybe a bit more about where they can find you, 123 Vancouver, what they should do if they feel this is the passion they need to take up.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have a volunteer page on our website, 123vancouver.ca. You can find us on Twitter at 123YVR. And you can also find us on Facebook, 123 Vancouver.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Hey, we're sitting down with the newest Vancouver City Councillor, Hector Bremner. Hector, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself, why you got involved in politics, and why you ran for City Council?
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for having me on your show. This is great. And hello to everybody that's listening. My name is Hector Bremner. I am 36. I have 2 kids. Married, live downtown in a heritage building called the Electra. It was the old BC Hydro building. And we're car free. We walk to work. We're in our office right now here in Gastown. I'm the Vice President of Public Affairs for this company. And so it's a type of communications job. You may have heard from my political appointments that I am an oil and gas lobbyist. Not an oil and gas lobbyist, never have been, but they keep saying it. But I work with a real wide variety of organizations, nonprofits to First Nations to local governments to companies that have issues either with government, public policy, public engagement. They're either regulated or something, and they have to speak to people. So that's what I do. And before that, I worked in provincial government. I was a political staffer. I chased a minister around for a few years, and so I worked mostly in the Ministry of International Trade. And then I spent a little bit of time in natural gas development and housing and the Deputy Premier's office. And then, so now I'm here, and now I'm newly elected, and I ran. Part B of the question was I ran because I felt for a very long time that Vancouver has become a city that we don't recognize anymore. There's a tension. My kids were born here, and I don't know how they're going to live here, even rent. My wife, who immigrated as a child to Vancouver in the 80s from the Philippines, I talked to her family and I go, could you choose Vancouver today? And they say no, and that breaks my heart. And I think that there's a lot of people listening to this show that are going, I don't know if I can live in Vancouver, my hometown, in 5 years, or my town of choice in 2 years. I don't know what my future is here. And so I think people are starved for a break in the paradigm that we've seen in the politics. We've heard a lot of the same solutions for a long time. Incrementalism in the face of, crisis. I think even this morning, the abundant housing tweet storms around, the fact that we have a record low number of condos available in this city, is not even really being talked about. I was talking to somebody the other day. I'll finish my tirade with I was talking to somebody the other day that was mentioning to me that in the 90s and in the early 2000s, in a year, it wasn't uncommon for us to bring on, dozens of buildings in Vancouver in a year. And, now we're lucky if we get 2 or 3, maybe 4 buildings a year done in the city of Vancouver. And I think that context for people is really important, that they need to understand that this is a housing crisis, and it's, we're dumping gasoline on it every day by taking no action.
Yeah, I think the by-election really showed that level of crisis. I mean, there were so many different ideas thrown out, different campaigns. You had the Gene Swanson sort of far left, almost socialize the housing, to your end of approve all the housing, not to overly
build it all.
Yeah. But in the end, it was unfortunate. I remember you saying in one of the forums, turnout's going to be 10%. Well, you were wrong. It was 10.99%. Got a few more people out, so you weren't quite optimistic enough. But in that divided field with all those ideas, you ended up getting 28% of the vote, roughly. So how do you go forward with that? Do you feel you have the mandate from the voters, or do you want to try and reach across to some of the other people who ran and say, hey, we all had great ideas, or maybe different kind, and you all recognize that crisis?
Mm-hmm. So I would say, I think getting to 10.99 was a little bit higher than what I was saying, obviously. But it was consistent with what you see at municipal by-elections. I think that there was, unfortunately, there was no doubt that there was an attempt to also make this the quietest by-election on planet Earth, right? So we did everything we could. We numbers aren't out yet, but I think we were spent about 3-1. So we did what we could, right? So we tried to get the word out. And I think our positive message of hope, and, I didn't spend a lot of time slamming the other guy where the other guy was only talking about me. I just said, well, look, we're going to bring forward ideas. And actually, you gentlemen are sitting in my office. Those 4 things written on that whiteboard over there in black were written in August. That was after the first meeting I had with my campaign manager, who we said, what is this campaign going to be about? And it says, we're not going to play politics. We're taking good ideas. We're getting the job done, and we're bringing people together. And that has been there since August, and it never changed. And it guided the whole campaign. So we said throughout this entire campaign, we're going to take all the good ideas. I would say the fact that I did get almost 30% of the vote in any election, doesn't matter what the turnout sample was, by-elections are what they are. We're the first campaign to aggressively go out on a supply message and say, we're not going to be out there defending the character, so-called, of neighborhoods. We're not going to go out there and take an incremental approach. We're going to bring, we're going to fight for a citywide plan. We're going to fight to open up missing middle density. We're going to fight to do these things. That has actually been a death note. You couldn't get 2% of the vote before with that message. So I think it's actually very significant that we did win on that message, because we did not run a safe campaign. In terms of, the ideas that we saw from my opponents, the other message that did well, you mentioned Jean, by her own admission, she knew she couldn't do those things, and, we wouldn't want her to do those things. And her rent freeze would actually hurt renters. It would basically trigger a cascading flip over of rental stock to condo. And you don't have to take my word for it. It just literally happened in Ontario about 6 months ago. They brought in more stringent rules in the same vein, and they had 28,000 purpose-built rental units on the books, and almost overnight it went to 4,000. They all got flipped over. So the reality is that we need to push past the rhetoric. It's not rich versus poor. It's not owner versus renter. That's not what this is about. It's not even, transportation. It's not about cyclist versus car. All of these have been false paradigms that have been used to play politics with us, with a government that I feel has been greenwashing and social justice washing themselves. I don't think they deserve this halo effect that they get. That they talk a good rhetoric, and they tried it again in this election. But I think people are seeing through it now. And my objective is to push past that. We're going to bring practical solutions. Already in my first week in the chambers, I've been trying to reach across the aisle, opening up doors to the others to try to join me in strengthening programs, and I've been rebuffed so far. But that's politics for you. But I am lockjaw focused on this, and we're going to be doing some exciting things in the near future. And I hope you and this audience will join me in some of the housing forums that we're going to be doing soon, and some of the engaging conversations. We're going to be talking about real solutions. And then I'm going to be able to take those things and bring motions forward and actually try to implement it. And it'll be up to the others as to whether or not they want to play politics or they want to come together and get the job done.
Well, circling back to the policy, your campaign focused near exclusively on zoning and supply-related issues, and probably be summed up as more of the right type of housing quickly. But do you see a role for the city or the province in handling any of the demand side at all? And kind of as a follow-up question to the housing issue in general, what would success for housing look like?
Yeah. So I would say, as long as you've got 20 people fighting over for one chair, that chair is going to become real valuable. So we have to deal with the fact that this is a supply issue. I mean, we are an urban city that the vast majority of our city, something like 70% of our city, is single-family detached home, and pretty much firmly entrenched in this zoning style that we can't really even get it out yet. So I can't underscore that enough and say that we have to deal with the supply crisis. In terms of demand, I mean, there's all kinds of conversations you can get into as to whether or not our immigration system, the investor immigrant thing works, and all these pieces. And I have some experience in this in my provincial work, but it's still a really small part of the market. You can twist yourself into a pretzel to try to find a solution by just telling people don't come to Vancouver anymore and prevent people to come to Vancouver. I'm sorry, you can't build that wall. There is no wall. There's no excluding people that's going to solve the problem. We aren't going to not have babies, because once you start banning immigrants, then do you start banning migration? Then do you start, like, what are we going to have, like a one-child policy? Like, where does it stop, right? Like, so at what point does this demand argument stop? Or do we just say, okay, it's all well and good to point fingers at individuals and scapegoat people, and, to say, oh, if we didn't have those guys, then, our housing problem would be solved. That's the old style of politics. We've been there before. And as Mark Twain said, history never repeats itself, but it rhymes. It's an ugly tune that we're starting to hum. Let's focus on what really matters. We don't build enough housing. We could take a city block of single-family detached homes and turn them into duplex and double the housing on that block. So if we did that at volume, and I've been saying through this campaign, if we build the right type, at volume, at speed, we will be able to bend the curve. And to your question about success, what does success look like? The land isn't going to get any cheaper. But success would look like us working in a citywide way to modernizing the housing styles, modernizing our neighborhoods to make sure that we're providing the housing supply that middle-class working families in Vancouver, not in the suburbs, but in Vancouver, can live in. And this year we had 9,000 less children enrolled in VSB schools. Success would look like 9,000 more children enrolled in VSB schools. Success would be not a 30% increase in homelessness in the last 3 years, but an elimination of street homelessness in the next 6. Those are the successes. Successes would be that middle income working families are not spending like all their money on their housing, right? That they're not just getting by. That a family that's taking in $200,000 a year, like a couple each making good money, not living paycheck to paycheck. That would be success. So I think a Vancouver that is livable, where people aren't so pressured, people aren't being forced out, and that we aren't becoming a city like sort of this country club city where it's going to be like this resort town where we're going to be like Chelsea in New York, where you're going to have $50 million condos across from Section 8 housing. That isn't a future for us, and so those are my kind of measures of success.
All right, switching gears. As you know, Vancouver's in the midst of opioid and fentanyl epidemics. New provincial governments dedicated hundreds of $millions to helping. Previous government was starting to step up and do some things too. Vancouver's been at the forefront of doing harm reduction and some of the leading charges on how to solve this, but we're still losing too many people, right? We're in Gastown, right? It's blocks away from here, which is Zone 1 or Site 0. I don't know what the right term is there. Ground Zero, that's the one. What do you think the city needs to be doing differently or more of? Should the city be advocating for full decriminalization of all drugs?
So this came up a lot.
We like easy questions.
Yeah, Bob. We debated this quite a bit during this election. So first of all, for context for everybody to understand, is that this is a North American problem, that this has been a concerted effort to dump opiates onto the market for about 25 years. There was, about 25 years ago, there was a series of studies that were done that said, we undermanage pain. It became very trendy to start prescribing opiates. And so the opiates became more complex. Well, not really. Everything, they basically said, pain is this complex thing, but all we have is a hammer, so everything looks like a nail. So that's what they started using opiates for everything. So I need to contextualize that, is that there needs to be a federal government step in here. We need to work with MSP, we need to work with physicians, we need to work with the pharmaceutical companies, and we need to put a stop to this flooding of the market of opiates, because that's how this has started. Second piece is that unfortunately we were very slow to address what's really killing people is not so much real fentanyl, it's carfentanil, and it's this fake synthetic version that's being snuck in here from overseas. So we, regardless if you legalize drugs or not, this stuff is out there and it's still going to be there. So it's another issue. It's a dangerous chemical. It's like someone sneaking anthrax into our country and then spreading it out all over the place. And that's what they're doing. So I think that actually there needs, I've been advocating to my friends in the federal and provincial governments, that we actually need to classify this and treat this under the criminal code as a dangerous substance, not narcotics, because it tends to have its own sphere of case law and prosecutions and standards and approaches and resources. But I think we need to treat this as someone's actually spreading anthrax around. Like this, that's literally what it is. It's poisoning people on purpose. And so this is something that needs to be dealt with immediately at that level. The other thing I think that we need to do is get back to the 4 pillars approach, which was working. There was a time in Vancouver that we had cut opioid deaths in half. There were some programs that were started by previous mayors that were working. They had good funding. There was interchange and a few others that had proven results, and they were cut. So why? So this is the kind of stuff that just was to my point earlier about, don't play politics. It doesn't matter if it wasn't your idea or it was another party's plan or whatever. Don't cut it. If it's working, it's working. And the 4 pillars does require, education, enforcement, and then the harm reduction sides. But on the enforcement side is what I would like us to do is to take, in America, what they were able to do, not that their war on drugs is particularly good, but their war on organized crime has been particularly good. They worked with their IRS and the FBI and other services. And if you showed up on sort of any organized crime list, the IRS would do a deep dive forensic audit on these guys all the time and just just all the time, all over them, right? And it works, right? It just harasses the hell out of these guys, keeps them out of the market, actually gets them on financial crimes, takes them out of the stream, because it's very, very difficult, both under their constitution and our charter, to charge people for those types of criminal offenses. Like, we literally have to catch you in a very specific set of circumstances to convict you. And even then, if we convict you, it's very, very hard to get actual real sentences. But for financial crimes, it's much more stringent, and it's great. So I know that Vancouver obviously has a big seat at the Integrated Gang Task Force. I think that if you're showing up on organized crimes list, even as a hangaround, we should be asking Mr. Trudeau to fund a strengthened and enhanced financial crimes division at the CRA and do deep dive audits on these guys all the time. I understand you say you're a drywaller, but why do you have all these cars and these homes and they're all under your girlfriend's name and she doesn't seem to have any employment? So like, a forensic audit will catch that stuff. You can't play, cutesy with these guys. They're going to go for you, right? So I think that we need to get tough on enforcement on the organized crime side. It's not so much about punishing drug dealers, is because even a lot of those guys don't matter. What matters is the organized crime that is actually the real problem. And they live in the suburbs, have nice homes, look like reasonable people, and but they're out there, and we need to disrupt those guys. So let me pivot now just to quickly. I was very clear throughout this campaign and these debates that we had. I strongly support the decriminalization of being an addict. I don't think possession for personal use is a problem. I don't think that you should be kicked out of your social housing because you have a drug problem. I don't think that your parole should ever mention drug treatment. Or it should offer it to you and it should supply it to you. But our prisons are full of people who have failed a drug test. Seriously. These are people who have failed a drug test, and they are in our prisons at about $15,000 a month. That's what it costs us to keep them there. So I've got a huge problem with the criminalization of addiction. And I think that we punish people unfairly. We waste a lot of court time. We waste a lot of parole officer time. We waste a lot of corrections monies on people that are not bad guys. They're broken people that are suffering. And, if they commit a petty crime to feed the habit, and then they're told, okay, we're going to end the habit, and then, you won't commit crimes anymore. Well, no, actually, they're going to go, I think the average is the average individual with alcoholism or drug addiction problems will go to treatment somewhere between 80 and 90 times before, if it ever catches, in talking to my friends at the last door. So, I just think that, those that are saying if you just make drugs free and you make it a business, it'll be fine, it'll be clean, it'll be great, and the world would be a better place. I question the logic of that. I think it's highly utopian. I also want to remind people that opiates used to be legal, excuse me. And in Great Britain, it was called the Lost Generation. It was in the 1880s through the early 10s, just before the First World War. It was deeply problematic societally. We need to focus on education. We need to focus on people's mental health. We need to make sure that people have, I guess the last thing I want to say about it is that the failure that I've seen from our politicians, from our leadership, is that we become plutocrats and sort of technocrats, right? Where we have forgotten that our job is also to make sure that people have a sense of value in their lives, that we are creating a society where people are engaged and they have something to do and they feel like they are a part of something. That's why people turn to drugs and alcohol, right? So if you create a society that's bored, if you create a society that feels undervalued and disenfranchised, we create a society that's going to turn towards escapism. And so I think that I think the societies that actually see low involvement in drugs and alcohol are actually societies where people feel like they have a value, and I know that what I'm suggesting is quite a big is quite a big thing,
a bit outside the city council mandate, but...
a bit outside that. But you know what? I would argue though that like I live across from the YMCA, and I love going there. I go there like every day, love it. So I like to go to the gym. My wife and I would go to the pool and sit in the hot tub, and we run into friends all the time, and it's great. It's a great place to be. It's like 4 or 5 floors of stuff. It's like an adult playground. You can like take classes all day long. Like there's like, it's cheap, it's easy, and it's great. But so I became fascinated with the model because I was like, all my life we've pretty much gone to the Y off and on, and I was kind of like, why do I like this thing so much? And I realized what it was. After I looked up who created it. Really interesting guy. Quick story. 1880s, Industrial Revolution in London, moves in from the farm like everybody else did. He was in the textile business, and he came into London and was terrified to find that everybody just hung out at the pub all the time. And he was just like, people are just getting drunk all the time and living this terrible, he's going to work and getting drunk, going to work, getting drunk. And he's like, this is terrible. There's got to be more to life than this. And we live in this rainy city, in a very similar city to London, right? They're like, outdoor activities is sometimes limited. So he was like, well, what do we do? So he created the Y. And he was like, it's kind of the same thing as going to the pub, but it's just not just healthier. And I think that that's why I'm just trying to pivot towards, I strongly believe that we at the civic level need to fight for community centers, and we need to make sure that we are like 1/3 of our budget or whatever it is now is CACs. We're taking this huge amount of money. I have no idea where this money went, and I think that everybody listening should be inquiring as to where did this money goes, because it's gone into a big black hole and we don't know where any of it went. We didn't get community centers, we didn't get amenities, we didn't get anything. We didn't get anything. All this money has been raised, and we don't have anything for it. And I think that if we had stronger community centers, if we had places where it was cheaper and easier for them to go to the library or take a class or a program that was offered by a civic center, or go to a place where they felt like they could kind of, that they felt involved in their community and that they were out doing something, and that it was, and they lived in neighborhoods that were more multi-residential, and that they felt that they were a little closer to their community, and that there was, more interaction. I think those are the things at the civic level that we can do to create those things. Because if you go to great European cities, it's all about the plaza, right? And so that's where civic governments actually do come in play. We touch the cities, the sidewalks, the parks, the streetscape. That is where the culture happens. We need to create that space.
Just a quick follow-up, which is probably a giant question as well. While we're sort of in the realm of drug policy, as you know, the federal government's legalizing cannabis next year, and the BC government's doing its rapid consultation, as every other province is kind of like scrambling. Vancouver has been in this, essentially treating it as a legal gray zone when it's technically not. It's technically still a crime to possess marijuana, but there's all these dispensaries all around, and they sort of popped up, and then the city went, well, that's way too many. I lived in England for 2 years, and when I came back, it went from like there were 3 or 4 to there were 3 or 4 per block. Mm-hmm. And then they brought in some sort of a licensing model, I guess, where they tried to crack down, make sure they weren't right beside schools, and limit the number. What do you think the city's role in the new cannabis regime that we don't actually know what look like yet should be?
Yeah, I've in my professional life, I've spoken at conferences on what's the future of government relations and policy and developing policy around this. So this whole thing has been a mess. Is the only way to describe it. It's just a mess. When the federal government, the current federal government, was elected, that basically they had said like, this is happening and we're doing this. And certain moves were made by other people and things started going down a certain way, but then they didn't. Then they didn't do it. Then they didn't legalize it. And so it's created this just mess. And the city of Vancouver started allowing these shops, and yeah, they're everywhere. And they are close to each other. They're right next to each other in some cases, like near, like even on Granville, like there's some that are like, there's 2 of them right next door to each other and one across the street, and like all this kind of stuff. My argument is this. I've said this from the very beginning. I think that it should be streamed a lot like and regulated a lot like alcohol. some of my friends in the cannabis world, and I do have a lot of friends in that world, they say that it's more like coffee. I'm like, no way, it's not like coffee. It's not like coffee. Shut up. It's not like coffee. It's not. Don't stop talking like that. It's ridiculous.
We all have coffee around the table.
We all have coffee right now. We're not sitting around smoking joints and drinking beer. So I mean, probably should be, but I mean, it's Friday. It's Friday. It's Friday. It was 5 o'clock somewhere. Yeah. But the argument I have is that I think the federal government should regulate it very similarly. I think that the provinces should actually have a means of, in order to capture the revenue and control quality, I think it'd be better if you did it like a central distribution, much like you did with alcohol. Now, there's some interesting things about that because it's, well, okay. There's the smokable product, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not super in love with the whole smokable product because we're just going back to the tobacco thing, right? Like we're going back to smoking, and for those listening and saying, oh, it's not the same thing, I don't know. Like if you're burning a plant and inhaling it in your lungs, this is not, smoke inhalation kills you. So this is we should be, if it's going to be edibles and if it's going to be other consumable products, okay, fine. Those have a longer shelf life, I guess is the point that I'm making. So central distribution works better that way. I think there's I think there's some groups advocating for a decentralized central distribution, but then I just don't know how the taxpayer, the whole point of I should say, yeah, I would say us as a society, how do we capture the best revenue out of it? And the whole point of legalizing it was the cash windfall, right? Like that's basically the big argument, right? So how do you get that? I think centralized distribution probably would be best. I'm generally just opposed to government retail. So I don't think government should be competing in the retail space. So let the private guys retail. I don't necessarily think that it should be sold next to alcohol. I think there's good science. I mean, I started off as thinking, see, this is evidence-based policy. I started off thinking that it probably made more sense to sell it together or in the same places because you already had the distribution network and you already, it's all kind of the same thing, right? But there's some science out there that shows that it's actually not a good model, that it actually doesn't work that well. So at the moment, I've been convinced that that isn't a good model. So if you do have standalone, I do think, though, that we should have the same restrictions in fairness to alcohol distributors and retailers. There needs to be distance requirements between each other, only so many licenses. I think that we should not be selling, I don't think private companies should own the licenses to retail either. This is another general concern I have with alcohol as well. For the benefit of the audience, if you're not familiar with this, is that what happens is that right now with our liquor licenses, you could get a private liquor license, right? So you get an LRS, and you get that for, let's say, from the government for like $60,000, $70,000, something about that. But then you turn around and you retail that, or you can sell it to another private individual for usually around $1 million. So I have a problem with us giving up these public licenses and then creating the secondary market. It happened in the cabs too. We sell them the medallion, and then the medallion becomes worth this secondary amount. But it's a public asset. So I have a problem with us doing it that way. So I'd rather us have operating agreements, much similar to the BCWI, BC Wine Institute, rather, the VQA licenses. That's probably the acronym people have heard of before. The VQA licenses, which are like an operating agreement. The province, through the industry association, owns the licenses, and then you can do an operating agreement. So I think that there is a lot to talk about with that. I just think that to me, a mature market looks like a place where a restaurant and a liquor primary should be able to offer you like infused desserts or infused drinks or whatever. I don't have a problem with that, but we also have to have a retail structure that is similar to alcohol. I don't think it should be near schools, and I don't think there should be high concentration areas. I don't think that they should be able to. Like right now in the windows of the pot shops, you can advertise all the smokable stuff and have stuff in display in the windows, but at a tobacco store, they have to be all blacked out and they're not allowed to have any advertising. So I think we shouldn't be promoting usage. So I think that there needs to be some standards in terms of how we advertise. And then lastly, I think that the federal government needs to have proper science done and say that there needs to be an equivalency rating on there in terms of what a comparable, like this product is comparable to X amount of glasses of wine. And Watermelon, who ran in this election, she was featured in a CBC piece, and it was kind of funny because she was like, oh yeah, these are great, and these are the muffins that we make. And then they took it to a lab, and they're like, well, one muffin was the equivalent to like half a glass of wine, and the muffin right beside it was the equivalent to 6 glasses of wine. They're like, this is like, this could really mess somebody up, right? Like, so we have to have the science. The science is not there yet in terms of a mature market. So we've got a long way to go, and it's complicated. But I think we've created this mess, and there's a bit of a cash grab on selling these licenses, these retail licenses in Vancouver.
The NDP provincially this last week introduced its bill to reform municipal campaign financing. Do you like their plan, which is banning corporate union donations, $1,200 individual limit? Do you think it should go farther? And as you know, during the by-election, Jean Swanson and Judy Graves released their donor lists just before the vote. Will you be releasing yours? And who were your big donors?
Second part first, I guess. So yeah, it's all being audited, I guess, right now, and it'll be published soon or whatever. But as to who the big donors were, I have no idea. I never talked to any of them. So, and yeah, we basically we spent what we raised, and we were, as I understand from some conversations, I think we were outspent quite significantly. We would have spent more than Jean and Judy in those campaigns, but labor also helps these organizations in a way that doesn't really get put on the books. So that's my biggest problem with campaign finance reform, any campaign finance reform, is that we are still the only G7 nation that doesn't really have these sort of reporting requirements of paid volunteers, basically, that go on campaigns. There's a bunch of fuzzy stuff that happens in campaigns. We all know about it, we all talk about it, and nothing ever gets done. In terms of, I think it makes all the sense in the world to standardize what's going on at federal and provincial anyways. Municipal, why not? Why would you have one that's different? It's been a little bit bizarre to watch the Vision people in particular who outspent us by like almost $1 million in the last general election, and who basically outspent us. It'll be close to 3 times, close to 3 times in this by-election. Talk about how great it is that big money's out of it. I mean, they are the big money party. But anyways, this is there's all kinds of things and practices that I think need to be looked at. I think that some of the third party stuff is deeply problematic. Again, donation limits, I do have to caution people because I think it's been really oversimplified by some journalists, and there's donation limits at the federal level and have been for a long time. I'm strongly opposed to taxpayer subsidized parties, and I'm really disappointed in the NDP for bringing that in. I think if you're going to do campaign finance reform, do campaign finance reform, but don't cheat. And I feel like that's propping themselves up. And I also think that we should all have serious concerns about this upcoming proportional representation referendum that's being gerrymandered to highly favor one side. So I think that it's a serious conversation we'll be having. I'm opposed to proportional representation. I don't think it works, and I think that we can go to ranked ballots, and we can look at other things like that at those levels of government. I think it's always fine to talk about electoral reform. We should always be trying to improve the system, but I don't believe that proportional representation is logically. I don't believe it works, and I think that the outcomes of it are not good outcomes. So that being said, in terms of campaign finance, we as a party are just interested in making sure that there's still fairness going forward, that we don't have taxpayers funding parties that, shouldn't be financed. And, if you should be raising the money yourself, and if people don't support you, as Gene said in one debate, I support, the only funding source being from people that support you. And I just stood up after that and I said, I couldn't agree more. So that was it. So that this next year will be interesting, obviously, not only just for the election, but I think this referendum, I encourage people to not get enamored by this panacea. Really look at the evidence on what's going to happen in this referendum. Look at the real evidence of what happens in these systems, and I just think governments need surety. At the end of the day, whoever has the mandate is the one who can get the most amount of people to agree with their cause. The official opposition, which doesn't really so much exist in the municipal level, but an opposition is not a wasted vote. It's not just unfair because you didn't win. You're still there. You still have power. You still have the power to hold government to account. Governments change their policy and positions all the time because of opposition and bipartisan work. So you can't say it's a it's a lie. This is called what it is. A lie to say that just because I didn't win, it wasn't fair. And just because I'm not in power, it's not fair. The system is set up in a way where everybody does actually have a voice. And again, the only wasted vote is the one that wasn't cast. So there you go.
Great. Well, why don't you let our listeners know where they can find you, social media, any of that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I'm most engaged on Twitter's a cesspool, so I do have a Twitter account. I don't really post anything on it. I'm mostly reading it, but you can find me on there, Hector D. Bremner, and but Facebook, Hector for Vancouver is my political page, and you can find more of my actual comments there. But yeah, I try to stay off the Twitter cesspool.
Fair enough. Thank you. Right, thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
And finally, moving into quick takes. First up, as we mentioned in our discussion with Keith, the provincial government, after deciding to put forward the bill to ban corporate and union donations at the provincial level, has put forward a bill to do basically the exact same thing at the municipal level. There's a bill now to ban corporate and union donations at the municipal level for the elections next year. There will be a $1,200 individual donation cap. So that will mean you can only give $1,200 maximum as an individual voter to candidates, parties, whatever you want to do. And there's going to be a host of restrictions on loans, advertising, and election expense limit. And this will be retroactive to October 31st, 2017. There's no political party subsidy in here like there is at the provincial level, interestingly, because...
Why would they bother? They're not going to be benefiting from putting that in.
And no one's calling for it, but the NPA, in response to this, did point out, yes, they've been calling for this. Vision's called for this. Everyone has called for this because nobody likes the fact hundreds of thousands of dollars have to be spent on a municipal election that's not worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the NPA is kind of upset because Vision is apparently already invested in all the technology it needs to run a good campaign next time. And they might be a few steps behind in their fundraising and all of this, and now don't have any opportunity to catch up.
Yeah, I've heard kind of the chattering that NPA doesn't do a great job of kind of maintaining that party infrastructure between elections. So, yeah, this kind of bites them a bit on that front.
Well, I can imagine just in my head, the stereotypical NPA donor is BD Development Corporation or something like that, not to name names, who want to get through a lot of projects. And so they just wait for the corporate money to roll in, the developer money to roll in, and run with that. Vision gets a bit of that. They also get union.
Get a good chunk of that.
They get a good chunk of that.
Been the main beneficiaries.
Well, and they also get a bit of the union donation that's been coming in, which is always much smaller. And COPE gets pennies. And who knows what they're getting now. This will force them all to develop those individual donor lists. And overall, I just think it's a good thing that $1,200 is still a lot. Like, that's the same limit roughly as what they're putting at the provincial level, in the same order of magnitude. Like, they could make it a tenth that or half that, but at least there's a limit.
Yeah, overall, it's just a welcome change, and there really isn't much to complain about on this one. Well, moving on to the federal level, the Governor General had a few things to say this week.
Can you believe that still today, in learned society and in houses of government, unfortunately, we're still debating and still questioning whether humans have a role in the earth warming up, or whether even the earth is warming up, period. That we are still debating and still questioning whether life was a divine intervention or whether it was coming out of a natural process, let alone, oh my goodness, lo and behold, random process. Yet so many people, I'm sure you know many of them, still want to believe that maybe taking a sugar pill will cure cancer if you will it good enough. And that your future and every single one of people here's personality can be determined by looking at planets coming in front of invented constellations.
So yeah, she took a few shots at a bunch of different kind of pseudoscience stuff. Everything from global warming denial to alternative medicine to astrology. And yeah, I think we're both pretty happy with what was said. I mean, hell, if I was saying that, I'd probably be even harsher on all of these.
Well, the thing that I've seen, and I definitely agree with everything she says, I don't disagree with any of it, or even the tone, but I've seen a lot of people on Twitter, even people who agree with her, go, ooh, should the Governor General go that far?
Yeah, and I kind of in the same position, or at least sympathetic to that view. And when the remarks were initially made, I made a pretty happy Facebook post about it. But there was nevertheless a certain, I guess, unease. It's probably the best way to describe it about this. And completely agree with everything that was said. I'm just not sure the Governor General really is the person who should be necessarily making all of these comments. Like I said, it's unease. I'm not saying she shouldn't. It's just uncomfortable for someone who's supposed to be above politics and controversy to be making statements that are controversial, even if they shouldn't be.
Clearly, the answer is to abolish the monarchy and let Julie Payette be Julie Payette, because apparently she's even more awesome. There's this whole thing that she's being anti-religious, but she just said, questioning whether life was a divine intervention. She's just saying, look, we have scientific accepted explanations for the diversity and existence of life on Earth. You can still believe in religion and be religious, just when you're outright denying science, this has effects on policy. I don't know. She is a scientist. She was speaking at a science policy conference, and I think this is a tempest in a teapot. It almost feels like too many people on the Canadian Poly Twitter were just bored this week because we didn't have any big scandals like the US that we'll get to actually talk about. So we're like, ooh, controversial remarks from an astronaut, from the Queen's representative. Well, in other news at the federal level, there's still ongoing controversies around Bill Morneau, the Liberals, and ethics disclosure. The Globe and Mail has a big piece confirming with Mary Dawson, the ethics commissioner, that fewer than 5 other ministers than Bill Morneau also indirectly hold assets, which have been disclosed, but highlight the entrenchment, I guess, of money in our government.
And this led to today's question period be dominated by exactly what fewer than 5 means.
At the same time, Andrew Scheer, it also has come out, has ownership stake in 3 what are called real estate limited partnerships, which has been nicknamed RRSPs for rich people because this is a way to treat high income as capital gains so it gets lower taxes, but is only really available to the wealthiest. Now, this has been disclosed, so there's nothing untoward there, but it did give the Liberals a shot to call him a hypocrite.
Yeah, and it's one thing I found interesting is that Saskatchewan apparently has lower limits on the amount of assets or income you need to be able to access this. So this might just be in part because he could maybe take advantage of this in a way he wouldn't if he was, say, an MP from Ontario, which is just one of those weird little bits of Canadian federalism at work. It is, I guess, slightly hypocritical, but I think the criticisms do also kind of miss the mark in the sense that the main accusations against Bill Marneau wasn't around using the numbered company for tax purposes, although he did receive some criticism for that. It was using it to hide the fact that he was the owner of a company, that he was making decisions which would positively impact that company. And Andrew Scheer is not in that position.
I think the one thing for me this entire couple weeks and few controversies have highlighted is just how Mary Dawson as an ethics commissioner is not proactive enough. She seems to be okaying a lot of things that are technically allowed, but maybe should be a little more proactive. I know we've had some of these watchdogs who, like Kevin Page, go very out there and take a lot of risks for their professional career, but I think make our democracy healthier. And this sort of, oh, well, I guess that's okay, but maybe the government should look at changing this eventually. Just, it doesn't do enough for us. But the funniest story, I think, this week was that Scheer was scheduled to speak on November 30th at the Canadian Club in Toronto, and this poster went out for the event on Twitter and social media, which showed that the event was being sponsored by Morneau Chappelle, the company owned, or formerly owned, by our finance minister. That poster went out again very shortly after, missing that logo, and it turns out Scheer went, I didn't approve that. Also, Morneau Chappelle is pulling its sponsorship now because that looks stupid.
And this wasn't something that was scheduled 4 months ago. This was an email that went out Tuesday. The fact that the comms people didn't catch that, and the CBC article, which we'll have in the show notes, has a screen cap of this, and the Morneau Chappelle isn't subtle on the announcement. It's not in some fine print that some tired staffer would have missed. It's very prominent, and the fact that the comms people who've spent the last 3 weeks going after Morneau Chappelle didn't notice that was questionable, to say the least. Well, moving on, Stephen Harper's back in the news as a memo he sent out to his clients at the consulting firm he works at now was made public, and it was basically him saying some not very nice stuff about the current government's NAFTA strategy. And yeah, basically taking a shot at it, which is not a good look for a former prime minister. They do tend to try and keep a low profile politically, and this was, by all appearances, a purely internal memo that wasn't supposed to get kind of distributed out to people, and this came through a leak, but it's still not great.
It's really not clear who leaked it or why. There's a Vancouver Sun article that explores this after the memo itself leaked, trying to just figure out, did anyone actually stand anything to gain? And it's maybe the Conservatives, but it also kind of undermines Scheer a little bit since the last guy is still apparently quite influential. But in the memo itself, I guess, Harper goes after Trudeau for too quickly rejecting U.S. proposals, for insisting on negotiating with Mexico, and for promoting progressive issues like labor, gender, and Aboriginal and environmental issues. The things Harper hated. He talks about how he fears that NAFTA renegotiations is going very badly, and he actually believes that Trump's threat to terminate NAFTA is not a bluff. He says the threat is real. So he's basically just trying to lay out that Canada could get really screwed over.
Yeah, and like I do think he's right that Trump is serious about this. Well, as serious as Trump can be on anything. So there is some valid points in there, and one should definitely take issue with the government's approach of trying to add new stuff in, especially stuff that Trump is not naturally going to be receptive to, rather than say trying to do a holding action and just stop anything worse from going on. And that's a reasonable question of strategy there, but it does come across as, I guess, pettier and meaner than it needs to be, which is kind of the Harper signature.
Well, this is why I really like the one leaked Canadian official who spoke anonymously to the Canadian press, who just said, it's a bit sad. And you can tell it's the government trying to spin this, but they're just trying to go, oh, Harper's still trying to pull strings from behind the scenes. He needs some better hobbies or something. But he's really trying to position this almost as a bad deal, or a worse deal than what we have is better than no deal. And that might be true, but if the Liberals were negotiating towards something that was worse than what we had, the Conservatives will be going after them for that. So there's no win for them. So they may as well at least try to put their own agenda forward as the main items. But it is just interesting to see that, I guess, Harper is still playing games behind the scene.
Yeah, and I just have to mention this, but the Vancouver Sun story has this amazing anecdote in there where Harper's hatred and concern of elites is so strong that he apparently once got in a panic when a staffer had to leave to deal with a leak, only to find out it was a leak in that guy's roof.
It says people had to literally talk him down from how anxious he was getting, which that's a paranoid level of worried you're getting about leaks.
Yeah, and even if this is a little bit of embellishment after the fact in the story, it is nevertheless amusing.
While we're talking about NAFTA, I guess we can close off with the couple big bombshells from US politics this last week. On Monday, the big story was that Robert Mueller, the head of the special investigation into the Russia interventions into the US election and whether Trump's campaign had any connections, he laid charges against a whole bunch of people. So Paul Manafort, Trump's former campaign advisor, and his partner Rick Gates were both charged with money laundering and conspiracy against the US and about 10 other charges. And then the almost potentially bigger story is that former Trump campaign security advisor, who no one had really heard of, George Papadopoulos, pled guilty earlier this month to a few charges, including lying to the FBI, meaning he's already given a plea deal to try to get some more information to Mueller. And this whole kerfuffle basically shows that Mueller is willing to play hardball with people who don't come forward with information, but is willing to give a good deal to those who will.
Yeah, just the George Papadopoulos stuff is I think most interesting in here, just because of all the other details that are in there that he lied about, where the eventual charge came from. And yeah, those add a fair bit of fuel to the Russia and Trump colluded fire.
And there's tons of fun stuff even in the charges against Manafort and Gates, talking about how they funneled $75 million through offshore accounts, including money from like pro-Russia parties in Ukraine, like cartoon level villain kind of stuff is still going on, or was going on. Trump tried to blow this all off as stuff that happened years before his campaign, but it does date up until last year. And saying the people who were working for my campaign were only criminals before my campaign. It's not a great look. So it remains to be seen how much more is to come on this. This is, I think, more the first step rather than the last we'll hear from Mueller. But meanwhile, on the other side of the aisle, just today, Donna Brazil, who was the interim DNC chair after Russia hacked the DNC emails, she wrote up a huge story on Politico today exposing how Hillary Clinton basically had an agreement with the DNC where the Clinton team would provide fundraising advice and assistance to the party in exchange for influence and control over campaigns, hiring, strategy, and all kinds of things. The scandal here is that this all happened during the primaries before the voting had even started. And this is now the Bernie Bros apocalyptic nightmare of, obviously, Hillary was a shoo-in and it was stacked against Bernie from day one, which is probably a bit of an over-exaggeration, but this is not a good look when the party has deep ties to one of the candidates.
Yeah, but that's the thing that's worth remembering here is that Bernie Sanders was the outsider and Hillary Clinton has been heavily involved in the inner circles of Democrat politics for years, decades, and even if there was no formal agreement or anything, or even any overt actions, you would still expect to have a slight or more than slight pro-Hillary bias in the DNC just from the informal networking that those two separate paths to the primary would have led to.
Of course, when your party's name is the Democratic Party, you should probably try to be as above board and appearances matter. So even if this literal written agreement to give Hillary Clinton's team, control over the puppet strings didn't result in any bias in her favor, the appearance is terrible. On the other hand, though, Donna Brazil is in the process of putting this together as a book and is potentially going to be looking at helping campaigns in 2020. And this might be just not in a besmirch her way kind of way, but a positioning of herself to look forward to the next election. And they're saying maybe this is a way to air a bunch of grievances so the Sanders people get riled up and then move another campaign for the DNC nomination in 2020, which is some, not four-dimensional chess, or not even three-dimensional chess, but the normal kind of chess that's I don't know. It's all messy.
I think we've kind of lost sight of the metaphor here. Yeah, this comes kind of as the urge to keep refighting the primaries finally seems to have died down a bit. So I think, unfortunately, don't breathe some fresh oxygen into this bit of smoldering fire in the background here.
Yeah, that's the most frustrating thing for me. I'm so tired of relitigating the 2016 Democratic primary that I want to move on. I want a strong, even centrist party in the US, let alone a left party, to try to present some kind of alternative, especially as there are ongoing special elections and going into next year's midterms.
The infighting, I don't think, is particularly healthy, and especially, this is the time where, putting aside those differences is really probably the best thing, because it's Donald Trump and the Republicans. You can't get much more cartoonishly villainous than that. And if you spend your time fighting with each other, it's just not going to help the situation at all. And that has been Politos. Find links to stories you mentioned in the show notes at politos.ca. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter at PolitosPod. Leave us a review and let us know what you think. Support the show and get early access to our interviews, which there will be many this week, at patreon.com/Politos. And if you have ideas for the show, feel free to send to us. Thanks for listening.